Okay, so Kabbalah means receiving, and I say that's all, because I have faced very frequently when I talk about teaching Kabbalah, oh, you're a Kabbalist? You know, like you couldn't be is the first response, of course, because I'm not old, I'm not a man, I don't have a beard, and I'm not hiding out somewhere in a protected community of people who look that way. So there would be no way I could be a Kabbalist, but also it would be kind of arrogant to say that I am. So what I wrote to you all in the email is to understand you are, we are, and that's all. And Kabbalah means receiving. Right? We're receiving. We're receiving insight. We're receiving wisdom. I ended our class last week bowing to the wisdom that I feel inheritor of, and I'm grateful is available to all who wish it in this lineage. So we are receiving wisdom, we're receiving insight. And the Ayin Dalet was our delet, our doorway to insight last week. And the Ayin Resh is our doorway to insight this week. Both start with Ayin, the I. And now, so we get to still explore Ayin, and we add Resh, which very literally means Rosh, right? So everything's the same except the vowels. Resh, Rosh. Rosh is head. Now it's very often used in Hebrew to mean the leader of, or the head of, the same way we say he's the head of the branch or she's the head of the community or whatever. So it can be used figuratively that way. Or the beginning of something like Rosh Hashanah. So we just have to remember that I talked about Hebrew being this language built for the sacred last week, which is my belief. Could be argued, but I probably wouldn't bother. It's a language built for the sacred, and one of the reasons I say that is because Rosh itself is used in different ways. Modern languages, we've created slightly different words to have a slightly different tone or slightly different meaning. We've gotten more variety in our modern languages. And this will all be relevant to our topic today. In our ancient languages, are the only one that I really know, Hebrew, there's less variety. So in one word, there is more. And you can play with it, therefore. Rosh Hashanah, Rosh HaMemshala, Rosh Haguf. The start of the year, the head of a government, the head on your body. Okay, so Ayin Resh. I, the head. In the graphic that I've sent, Ayin, Resh, Resh, Ayin, the way that I drew these as I was having my Kabbalah, my experience of receiving insight, are these spirals, because you're switching them around and around and around and around, in this case 2 letters, not 3 or 4. And then what spins out from there are these different meanings. And here's where the hidden is. Last week we looked at Ayin Dalet, witness, Dalet Ayin. Got my flashcards today. You'll have to pretend you can see Resh and Ayin. We looked at Dalet Ayin, witness, and Ayin Dalet, knowledge. Guess what we're looking at today? The tree of knowledge, Da'at, the tree of knowledge, Da'at, of Tov and Ra. And I'm going to try really hard to not say either of those in English, because how do we know what it was in English when there wasn't any English? So from da'at, which we explored already last week, bring your da'at from last week to this eitz hada'at. Eitz hada'at, to see where I'm pointing, tov vera. Christian translations, because pretty much that was the beginning, as far as I've understood, of English translations. Christian translations, good and evil. I want to be careful how I say this because it's a bit of a judgment. The conventional Christianity, the most pushed forward Christianity, likes the word evil and sin. I have found. And the problem with that, so the reason I want to research more deeply is you got a whole lot of people feeling bad. You got a whole lot of people thinking about sin and evil. And I want to question the origin of this idea. I've put us all on mute, Rahmana, which you may have heard or not, but it's a trial. I want you to all really feel free to just, click and speak up. Click and speak up.
I wanted to say that the fact that the word live, or maybe alive, but live, is reversed in the word evil is interesting in terms of the way you're using permutations with the Hebrew language.
It could. I don't know enough about the English language, but the one distinction I'll make, not to counter what you're saying, just to give even more compliment to the Hebrew, is I believe it was built to do this. And I don't know if other languages it's a more of a coincidence or not, maybe. But from how much so it's not a but, it's just complimenting the Hebrew again, how much I love working with the Hebrew. I've seen these magics so many times. It feels very intentional. And could be as well in Hebrew, in English for sure. Okay. Poor connection. Okay, from Noah to everyone. He's poor connection here, so listening with video off if you haven't seen that message from Noah to everyone. Creation. The creation story, come study with me for 10 years because I have a lot more to study on it too. It's amazing. It is amazing. So I'm going to try to stick to our Ayin, Resh Ayin. Here's the most important thing. Let me say the bottom line before we dissect it more. Ayin Resh. It means awake, alert. Eranut is alertness. Ayin Resh, with the two dots, Ayin Resh, is awake. Awake and alert. But nothing in the Genesis story refers to those concepts, even though the root is there frequently. The root, so over here is where we have awake and alert, air, on this side of your graphic. The root we see in the creation story is erom, naked, is how it's translated. But let's stay open to understanding that the root has to do with being awake and aware. And just slightly different vowels, and you get arum, which I'm calling wise and aware, but guess what the serpent was called? He was called arum, and he was called cunning and sly and something negative. by the Christians. No beef against that, just saying, when people translate, it's hard, unless you're working at it, to not put in your bias. Because if you didn't live this experience, direct experience, if you were not in your witness presence at the time of the Garden of Eden, the first earthling, the first dividing of the waters above and the waters below, if you weren't living in it, how would you know what arum means about the snake, about the nachash? You wouldn't know. You would have to derive it from its context. And the context is that one told the woman to eat the wrong fruit, if you want to read it that way. So all I'm saying when I'm saying it doesn't necessarily say the snake is cunning or sly or off base in any way, is I want to see the evidence. Now, the evidence is on the other pages I sent you, but let me talk through it first. The evidence is the concordance. I mentioned that this was one of my ordination gifts. And look at the size of this print. So every place that every word appears in the Hebrew Bible is here. So all I have to do is look up arum, which is translated as cunning, and see every place it appears. Well, guess what? It doesn't mean cunning anywhere else. Like nowhere else. It appears twice in Job, and I'm not going to go over those quotes because it's just too much for today, and Job is a whole other style book. Feels like it takes me into a whole different mindset. So we'll leave those. There are 2 appearances of this word. Everyone know what word we're talking about? Am I going too cryptic? Arum, which is what the snake was called, translated as cunning, based in the word for awake, in the root letters awake. So the only 4 other places, we're talking about a word that appears 6 times in the whole Hebrew Bible. Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. 6. You know, some words like aid for witnessing, they're appearing multiples of tens of times. Elohim, you know, Yad, Rosh, all kinds. But this word is only there 6 times. The 4 other times are all in Proverbs. 4 appearances in Proverbs. Mishle in the Hebrew. And as you may have seen, if you've already looked at Proverbs, most of that's designed where a sentence can stand on its own, right? It's a proverbial proverb. It's a sentence that sort of stands on its own. Every time in Mishle, the writer is referring to wisdom of some sort. I mean, we have to look at the context too. I didn't talk to the writer, but it's translated even in the English as wisdom. Or this is on your second page of verses, if it's not too hard, because we're very conceptual, but to look at this second page of verses, there's a list that starts Proverbs, and there's the 4.
Can you give me the reference? I don't have a printer, so I brought my
Yes,
Tana.
Proverbs chapter 12. Verse 23. Arum is translated here as prudent. Proverbs 12, chapter 12, verse 23. If I didn't say verse, that's what I meant. It's translated here as prudent. Yeah, every time in the translation I was looking at, prudent. Other translations can say things about wise. And that's it. So the snake is cunning, sly, certainly negative. I mean, you know, the general impression of the snake is a wrongdoer, manipulator. But everywhere else in the Hebrew Bible, 2 in Job, again, more cryptic, but in the direction of wisdom, and 4 in Proverbs about the wise man, the wise person versus something else. So once I understood that, because I looked at this root air and arum for the snake, it was one of the first things I looked at. Then the other place in the creation story where it stands out often is arum. Again, we talked about how these are the same root letters, but then the consonants differ. Sorry, these are the same root consonants, the vowels differ. So arum is what the human, the earthling, the man and his wife, I'm saying different ways they're talked about, that where the way they were, which is translated as naked. But why weren't they all just wise? Or what could we say? What would be the word that covers awakeness, alertness, and wisdom? Ayin Resh, the eye in your head. The eye in the head is in a few different wisdom traditions, ancient like the Hebrew. And the Hebrew and Semitic have the eye in the hand that they're still showing often. So there is in the history of the Hebrew some understanding of having eyes that are not just these organs, right? So we know the Hebrew lineage has at least referred to that some. Usually they don't talk about the ayin hashlishi, the third eye, though my children know about it. But that is the ayin and the rosh together. So what would be a word for what these people were, the earthlings were, that encompasses awakeness, alertness, and wisdom, which if we look in the concordance, we cross-reference, we see that word's used to refer to wisdom. Is it naked?
Conscious?
I was going to say enlightened.
And even if we think of enlightenment, if we take it out of the New Age idea, if we think of, you know, the Enlightenment as the era, you know, that historians talk about, if we think of it as a more on the ground idea, just to say it could be, yeah, what other words come to mind? I don't have some good ones. That's why I'm asking. I've been contemplating. Go ahead.
Actually awakened as the passive in a way, that something has awakened them.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like gerunds, awakening or evolving, co-creating.
Mm-hmm.
So that the Havaya can realize itself through us, made in its image.
Right, and don't forget, this is the original state. I giggle because of that concept of original sin that I believe has hurt people and humanity very much as a concept put on people. But prior to anything with the nachash, anything with the snake, which we'll get back to, the people were arum. They were what's called naked, but it's ayin resh. So I think it's more than even if they were without clothes, because we have later things about them being clothed, but it's cryptic there too. That's another study. Even if it does mean something about no clothes, it's got to be more than that, because Hebrew is more than its literal translation. And we see this very much because of the Ayin Resh Ayin Rosh.
And there's nothing wrong with being naked. A child is naked and they don't feel anything amiss.
So maybe there is a sense of innocence, again, whether or not they were physically naked, but that kind of innocence, awakeness, alertness. We see that in young children too. But this is all prior to eating of the fruit of the knowledge. We have to remember that da'at is in front of it every time, of tov v'ra. And as I said, I might get through this whole lesson without translating to English tov or ra, because I feel like the extremity that's been put to us in the most prominent religious teachings has hurt us as being so extreme, that there's sin you can't come out of, or there's sin that is heavy and lasting. And this is a much bigger teaching through for more about Genesis that we may not get into today. But they were this erom, okay, prior to, I don't remember right now, if someone's looking, you might see, prior to even knowing about the tree, but definitely prior to choosing to eat of it. Because there's a place where they're told about it, and then later they choose to eat of it. And right now I'm not remembering offhand. But I want to talk about tov v'ra now, because ra is the opposite, or the permutation of air. It's actually not the opposite in my mind. It's the reconciliation of pairs of opposites is what's held here. But we're given tov and ra is very much opposite. Now, question to you who are familiar with the story or who want to look quickly. How do we know what tov means? If you read the first 6 days of creation, how do we know what tov really means in where it's written in the 6 days of creation? From Noah to everyone, and it was tov. Go ahead, Ra.
It describes the exquisiteness of every stage of evolution, or of every stage of the exfoliation of life. And then for humans, it was very much that.
Very. Mm-hmm. It's very tov. Bert, were you going to say something in there? No. When you see tov at the end of every day, and you use the word exquisiteness, and then the very exquisite, it makes me wonder. In my Kabbalah, my receiving, I was wondering, da 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 tov, da 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 tov, da 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 tov, da 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 me'od tov, tov me'od, right? It didn't feel like the opposite of anything. This is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't feel, when you're just reading about those days of creation, that then so exquisite feels more like it. I don't have a word, so I'm not grasping for one, but it didn't feel like something with an opposite. It felt like something like a yes, like an affirmation, like yowza, like the divine Yahoo, is how it feels. I can't prove this, but I want us to consider it when we're wrestling with receiving something more here. I want us to consider that tov of creation did not have yet an opposite. Awake, alert, exquisite. Right?
When you say yet, in one way it never has and never will have an opposite, except that people block their recognition of the essential goodness of life. Then they make that up, but it's not real. I mean, it's real on the 3D level, but it's not real in the sense of eternal.
That's getting closer to what I'm wondering about. So in the sense of the eternal, in the eyes of the eternal, in the eyes of Creator with capital C, Tov. Tov. Tov me'od. Right? V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. Love Creator with all heart, soul, and this word we don't know how to translate in that context, me'od. And for me, it's just more, right? So tov me'od, more. So if in the eyes of the divine, there is nothing but tov, there is nothing but actual isness, exquisite, vibrating creation, then in whose eyes, who was not supposed to eat of tov with and an opposite? And who did eat of tov and an opposite? And who now knows the difference? And who now walks around saying, that was a good day, that was a bad day. Oh, my body feels really good. Oh, I feel so bad, right? So in referring to what you said, Ra, in the 3D world, which we live in, I'm a proponent for, everyone's different on this, but I am a proponent for acknowledging that we do live here. You know, I had an adult student once who was very feisty and eager around oneness. It's all one, Keren, you know, he's telling me. And then I slapped him across the face, gently, but enough so he could feel, I'm just listening to his fervor, the oneness, and it's all, I slapped him across the face and I said, who slapped and who got the slap? We can't deny that part of our experience. We can widen the lens, which I think is what the creation story helps us remember. We can widen the lens. But what we're learning here is in eating of the knowledge of good and evil, our lens was reduced to this opposites. We don't have to stay reduced. This is a whole other question. Go ahead, Leslie.
It's bringing up the whole idea of morality and making moral judgments about things.
Yes, and our Jewish tradition has been very much taking us there. You know, the interpretation of Torah, the Talmudic, has been very much about what is moral and what is ethical. And no one, I wouldn't say this is wrong, but one aspect of our existence, when I go in and read the creation story, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't feel my small human, that there's a slap and a slapper. I feel, I want to keep borrowing your word, Rahmani, an exquisite, something where you couldn't even say it's opposite.
Tomas used to like to say, the vastness that relaxes taxing attachments.
You're going to have to say it again slower. This is what I always used to say to Tomas, again slower.
The vastness that relaxes taxing attachments. We go back to the Tov from the constricted small place where we're attached and have expectations and get disappointed and get all gnarled out of shape.
And we have evidence of that teaching you just said being a big thread in the Hebrew teaching. Mitzrayim, Egypt, the narrow places. It's the definition of the word, of the root of the word Mitzrayim for Egypt. And it's the story we retell the most. It's in so many places we refer to Yetziat Mitzrayim, not just Passover. So there is this remembrance all the time to move from narrow to vastness. And I do believe that, you know, this is a bigger philosophical discussion that we don't really need to have, but that a whole human being can move, can respect the narrowness. That's what I was trying to teach this student who wasn't so much into the bigness, and can respect the bigness. And that is what makes us more whole, let's say. So for me, I don't cancel out any piece of it. But getting back to the story, because we could definitely have a lot of philosophical conversations. Let's look at this sheet now that I've introduced it, and bring it, we'll be going sort of back over, but seeing it in the actual text. So on page 1, and Rahmani, that's Bereshit chapter 2, Genesis chapter 2, starting at verses 21 through 25, but we'll be skimming through most of it till we get to our point. So in Bereshit chapter 2, this Adonai caused a deep sleep on the Adam. I just want to point it out a little bit, because this is how we're so much in the mystery in this story. Adam was not his name. Sorry. Ha-Adam would translate as the earthling, is the best translation we have, because Adama is earth, and it says Ha-Adam. We're referring to a thing here. The ha at the beginning of a word means the. So I'll just translate as we go through from verse 21 a little more in that way. The Adonai caused this deep sleep, for the Ha-Adam, the earthling, took one of the ribs and closed up the flesh. And the Adonai Elohim took that rib from the Adam to create an Isha, translated as woman, which is fine for now. There's a lot of Kabbalah about where that word comes from, and Aish and Hey. And took the Isha to the earthling. Okay, so the only reason I'm going to go through this right now is not we can get into the earthling and the man and the woman, but we can't now. I want to point it out because this is the context of this mysterious dream-like world we are reading about. We're not reading about something as man, woman, okay? Because the Isha was taken to the earthling. And the earthling said, this time, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And the earthling said, this we're going to call Isha, because Me'ish, from a man, she was taken. So that's, who's the earthling, who's the man, who's the woman? Okay, we'll leave it, but just recognize where we are right now. V'yu shnehem arumim, they were both naked. Ha-Adam v'ishto, the earthling, not said as a man right here, and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Now, let's assume we don't know exactly what ashamed means here, because I'm not going to also get into the concordance on this, but I want it to stay open enough. They were something. They were not something, even though they were arumim. So you can see I have the green there for verse 25. They were arumim. This is right after they became split in some way. Maybe we had an earthling, a man and a woman for a little while. I don't know. All I know is it's a little shifty. Okay. So after the splitting is when we find out arumim, not at the creation of the earthling, after the splitting. So what we're going to keep seeing are these splittings. Ish, Isha is clearly, we're starting some opposites, the man and the woman, masculine, feminine. This is when. And the very next verse, chapter 3, verse 1, or am I wrong? Is there any verses after 25 for someone who's looking at the source? Or does it go to chapter 3?
You're correct.
I'm correct.
25, last verse, and then verse 1.
Okay.
Of 3 is the very next verse.
Okay, good, because I was remembering that I thought I was correct, but then I realized that I've cut and pasted these, so then I doubted myself. Okay, very next verse. After the first appearance of erumim, which we've already said naked would at least be too small of a term to describe erumim. They are alert, awake. What were the other things we say? Enlightened, vulnerable and innocent. Oh, we said innocent, like a child's kind of innocent presence. And the very next few words, hanachash, we didn't go through all the animals and talk about what they were and what they weren't. Hanachash haya arum. The serpent, snake, I think that's fine for now, was more subtle in this translation. I looked, in preparing for class, I looked through, I love looking up on Google because you get usually first Christian translations, and some of the pages have like 10 different, the St. James, the Huzamowachi, the king this, the king that translations. So, all of them were cunning, sly. I think some even worse for the poor snake. But the back-to-back of this is very, it's just inside of this mystery map of creation. It doesn't feel accidental that they were this thing we call naked, but it's only a slight vowel change to what the serpent was. A slight vowel change, which doesn't, no Hebrew scholar would argue that a slight vowel change means the two words are more related, but I can say it feels more related.
It would be interesting to find out what the Koine Greek indicates, because according to my niece, who is a clergy, when people come to her with a part of the Bible that makes no sense to them, she goes to the Koine Greek. And my understanding is that's closer to the Aramaic and the Hebrew texts. And
I should definitely continue.
Yeah, and then it gets more codified and linear, dualistic with the Latin, and then with the European languages. But the Koine, K-O-I-N-E, Greek.
And there was a source that I remember, but I don't have a copy any longer, that is translated by a Syrian who was fluent in Aramaic.
Oh, there's the Lamsa translation. Yeah.
Yes, Lamsa translation.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good reminder that when I get to the depth of these things, it could be really good to look at some of those more potentially original translations. And for the time I spent in Greece, there were some pretty beautiful overlaps between Greek roots and Hebrew roots that I kept finding with my friends.
It'd be fun to meet somebody who was fluent in Greek and of a parallel consciousness that you could dialogue with, or somebody. Yeah.
We'll send that prayer. I'll take it. So going through from verse 1 of chapter 3 down to what's at the bottom of my page, verse 5 of chapter 3. Now this is what the wise, awake and alert serpent had to say. And probably naked too, because who's ever seen a snake in clothes? Ki yodeya Elohim, here's da again, knowledge. Not just Elohim said or thought or planned, right? We have to assume that every word's pretty intentional. Elohim yodeya, knows, has knowledge. Ki b'yom achalchem, I didn't put my glasses on to read. Ki b'yom achalchem mimenu, v'nifkachu einayim, your eyes will open. Where are we? We're in Ayin Daled and Ayin Resh zone here. And your eyes will open, to me, is not an accidental metaphor, or even potentially not a metaphor. Maybe there is an eye in the head that will open, or two. So God knows, Elohim Yodea, your eyes will be opened and you will be like Elohim Yodea, Yodea Tov Vera, knowing Tov. Now, let's not translate Tov. Let's just remember how Tov felt to read about at the end of every day of creation. Tov, 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 Tov Me'od. And then you're going to Yodea Tov Vera. You're going to know Tov Vera. Not just, you won't just know Tov anymore. You're going to know Tov Vera. So what is Ra here? To me, it feels like a permutation of air, which we saw so frequently. We've seen Erom, we've seen nakedness, we've seen wisdom of a serpent. That doesn't mean the serpent's using their wisdom for good. I have one son who is incredibly intelligent and has to be redirected very often towards proper following of rules. So when we call this, if we go back and call the serpent wise, it doesn't mean that the choice of the serpent was according to God's command. But lots of us do wise things that are not according to a command, a rule. There might be consequences if we do a wise thing that's not according to a rule. But that's a whole other story. Okay, so what is Ra here? Well, says the Nachash, Elohim knows if you eat on that day, your eyes will be open. And you will have knowledge. That da we talked about, the aid and the da, of Tov Vera. So what does Ra feel like here? Well, when I read through it after all this Tov, 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 and then Arumim, this naked, alert, awake, innocent, childlike state of being, Ra didn't feel so heavy to me here. It just felt like another option, right? There was Tov, 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 Tov Me'od. And now there's Tov Vera. Oh, chocolate and vanilla? Chartreuse and fuchsia? It doesn't feel too bad, maybe yet. It's okay if it does start to feel evil, but let's see, let's see before we have to sink into that. So what did the woman see in verse 6 of the same chapter? She saw the tree was tov, lama'achal, good to eat. That's how she saw. She saw the tree was good to eat. And after they ate them, yes, the eyes were open. And they knew, right? There's the da again. They had the knowledge. They knew that they were naked. So what's the problem with Ra? Coming back to what you asked me last week, Rahmane. Could I please use the name you meant to use and not the nickname that I heard so frequently 10 years ago and I guess I adopted. But I said to everyone before you joined, because it was in the front of my mind, that when I imitated others, probably using Ra, because I know you probably never asked me to based on what you said last week, it didn't ever register for me as Ra, first of all, because to me the Ra is a guttural. But also, I've already been working with this permutation, and I'm not so sure what that means anymore.
Well, if it's the expansiveness that helps us stay in touch with reality, then maybe the Ra is just the coagulated, or the embodied. It's like the slap that's not part of the totality, but it's still what it is.
The word constriction comes up for me. You talked about Mitzrayim being the narrow places, the opposite of expansion, as Rahmana said.
Both thumbs up. You're both already going in the direction I was hoping, because I forgot to say in all my opening caveats that I'm sharing with you this one as the second one, because Ayin Dalet, I sort of received a full package, and the Ayin Dalet brings us really right to here. The Eitz Hada'at Tov Ra. What are you going to know? Tov and Ra. But I have not been given a whole package on this. There's still questions, and you're really helping say, well, maybe the Ra is, I won't try to repeat what you both just beautifully said, but that is the question. That's what we need to stay open to. And again, why do I feel passionately about making sure that Ra is not overlooked in its totality, permuted, and how the story, this is the first story of the Hebrew Bible too. That's what smacked me in the face when I was reading it. You know, this is, and it feels like the first story. It feels like a story that's more mythical and mystical and primal than so many others. And it's right there at the beginning. This is where we get introduced, right? This is where formation is happening. This is Genesis. So I don't want to, that's the only reason why in this story, I don't want to jump too fast. Wait. Ra is what? You're telling me, I want to see it for myself. And what we're seeing, we're all still open. Tov Vera of that tree. So one of my seeings was the aid, which we talked about in detail last time, is the joiner, is the place of reconciliation, because it is the Eitz Hada'at Tov Vera. So if you know, if you have Da'at, which embedded in there is the witness presence, Tov Vera, if you can behold these Tov and something that's not, that's the slap. But if you can put it on a tree of Da'at, then, like she said, like Rahmana said. Do you want to say it? Can you say it again from what I just said, Rahmana? No.
So from that place of true knowledge, then there's no schism between the infinite pure potentiality and the embodied reality. It's all part of the Echad. And our job is to learn how to live in that way, all of us on earth.
And where is the tree planted?
In the center, right.
It is, and it said that it is written as that. Yes, something about something, what you just said. I'll leave it to Rabbi Rahmana right now on those words. Any other inciting, any other Kabbalah going on? And no, I'll definitely pay attention to my chats because I wasn't always seeing yours right away. Well, then I'll go ahead.
Sorry, see if I can get speak in here, but it seems like maybe, I'm not sure if you're going to get into this, Karen, but there's certainly something, of course, about knowing that their eyes were opened and they knew that they were Erumim. not so much naked, which is, it's like the trivial understanding of it, but not only were they erumim, but they knew it. Now they knew it after eating of the tree. So there seems to be, you know, something of the knowledge where they know, not only are they erumim, but they know what it's like, in the sense of there is something other than that, other than this.
Amen. Well said.
I'm still struggling over the seems like unrelated meanings ascribed to the word arum. In verse 25 of chapter 2, arumim, the plural, is translated as naked. And then the very next verse, verse 1 of chapter 3, arum is translated as subtle. I have another translation here that uses the word shrewd, but I still can't make the connection between these two verses, the same word in these two verses. It's obviously the same Hebrew word, and why the English translations are so different.
And I think you might be saying, Mr. Genetically Related to Me, I think you might actually be saying the first thing that caught me when I dove into this text in the desert of Israel, living in a hut built by a woman made of stones in the middle of winter, and the roof blew off. Just to give some context for where I was looking at this deeply. That I think that's where I went, wait a second. They taught me in Hebrew school, but look at this, right? So it is striking, and I hope that we at least began to reconcile it, that there has to be something about, now look, the vowel patterns are different, right? Saba, you see that very clearly, but they're not very different, and it is one verse right after the other, which is not coincidental, I trust. So I think that is a big part of what we are struck with, and just to be struck is a lot because it opens us to a new understanding. But I think part of what we're saying is there's got to be something in nakedness that more has to do with alertness and awakeness, because there is also something in wisdom, or even shrewd, which is, I guess, a less crowned glory, but still sharp, that has to do with alert and awake. I think that the root is what reconciles it, air, alert and awake. Our nakedness, like Rahmani pointed out, I think is the best way for us to maybe be able to get into it. And we've seen that not just in exceptional toddlers, that's how they are. You know, nakedness and this incredible alertness, the physical and the mental go hand in hand. And maybe not wise yet for a toddler, maybe not wise in the da'at. You know, once we bring in the eitz hada'at, and maybe the snake, did the snake ever eat? I'm pretty sure the snake didn't eat the fruit. I mean, I'm sure in the words itself, but we haven't ever been taught something different somewhere else, right? So
Yeah.
the snake stayed on the ground without the da'at. So I'm attesting that da'at, or da, just to take the two-letter root, is the bridge of this, as Rahmani called, schism. Or is the place where our alertness develops. I want to point out, because we're getting towards the end of time, so I want to point out one more fact and then one more thought. All of these proverbs that I had listed on page 2 of my list to you, and Rahmani will try to say what I'm talking about. Of the 4 proverbs, the only 4 other places that the way we called the snake is written again, of those 4, da'at comes up twice in the same phrase. So of the only other 4 that have this arom the adjective of the snake, descriptor of the snake. Of the only other four, 50% of them have in the same phrase da'at. The prudent man conceals knowledge, it says. Okay, so the arum man, the shrewd human, Adam. Koseh is more like covers, so it could be veils. I like the word veil better than conceal. Veils knowledge. That's Proverbs chapter 12, 23. And the other one, Proverbs chapter 14, verse 18. The thoughtless come into possession of folly, them. But the prudent, the arumim, are crowned with knowledge. So da'at is right there, again, in almost every place, or the majority of places, where the description of the snake comes up again. This cannot be just random. We're talking about a huge body of text, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And in one place, Proverbs 22, the verse 3, Ra'ah is with arum. A prudent man sees Ra. The arum, just like the snake, or the arumim, just like the naked ones, see Ra'ah. So the permutation is done in this proverb, right there. The permutation is done for us in this proverb. I'll say again where it is so you can look in your book. Proverbs 22, 3. Right there. Prudent man sees the Ra. Vayar Elohim ki tov. Let me just get this out, Rahman. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. I apologize. I really apologize. The Vayar Elohim ki tov, Vayar Elohim ki tov, Elohim sa tov, Elohim sa tov. Proverbs 22, 3. Arum, the naked, sees Ra. Rahman.
So many wisdom teachers say that we are all basically enlightened. We do know Hashem. We do know the essential oneness. And it's only because we're believing in concepts that derail us, that have us think we don't. And then in believing that, we behave in that way. But that the essential knowing of what we are, what we're part of, is wired in.
Seems like this story would support that, right? The exquisiteness, I'll keep borrowing that word, was perfect to me. The exquisiteness of creation, this watercolor. If you, when you read the creation story, it's this watercolor, you know, things with I mean, tohu vavohu. We don't even know what the heck, right? So it's just watercolor painting. And then things divide, you know, and then the lines becoming clear. And there's a ha'adam, an earthling, but then there's an isha, and then there's an ha'adam and an isha. It's watercolor, it's abstract. And in that exquisiteness, we are, earthling is, okay? And we do see a very distinct schism, or a very distinct happening, a very distinct line in the eating of the tree of knowledge, da, of Tov and Ra, which still we can leave wide open because there's no evidence yet that we have to call Ra anything. And for those of you who want and are interested in the depth of Hebrew, many places, this I still have to research, so this is a Keren's working on it piece. A wicked person or wickedness is referred to as Rasha, Resh Ayin. So there is another word, is what I think that Ra might be way more open than it ever has been assumed. And there might be a Rasha. Look, all kinds of stories of legends have a wicked one. My concern is when bad, evil, devil is in the creation story. Give us a break. Let us live. Give us a chance. My original exquisiteness, my original nakedness, my original alertness, my original willingness to know, to see, the ayin. Let me have this. That's why Keren's Kabbalah feels protective of the creation story. If we want to talk about wicked, Rasha, later, I don't think there's any wisdom tradition or ancient tradition or philosophizing group of people that don't talk about that. It is a concern for humanity. But can we let it go in this creation story? So here's how I want to example it to you. Somebody who's looking in an actual text of the whole Bible, somebody find when Elohim or Yah or whoever it was at that moment said, "What have you done? Did you eat of the tree?" Somebody please find that. We're going to do a little play.
Well, first Elohim says, "Where are you?"
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay, so you play Elohim. I don't even have the text in front of me. So you're going to play Elohim and I'm going to play Ha'adam, the earthling. Let's say it was a man and a woman, or 3 men and 2 women and 5 heads. I don't care, but Ha'adam. Okay, go ahead. Just you say only the Elohim stuff.
Where are you?
I'm here. I'm scared, but I'm here.
Who told you that you're naked? Did you eat of the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat?
Oh boy. Oh boy. I think I might have made a big mistake. Help me out here, Elohim. I'm feeling really scared because I think you did tell me not to, and I think I did.
What is this you have done?
I guess it's called a mistake because it feels bad.
Because you did this, more cursed shall you be than all cattle and all wild beasts. Oh no, that's Elohim talking to the snake. On your belly shall you crawl, and dirt shall you eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They shall strike you on your head, and you shall strike at their heel. And then to the woman, it goes on. It's pretty miserable.
Keep it coming. Go ahead, keep it coming.
To the woman, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bear children. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And to Adam, he said, because you did as your wife said and ate of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you. But your food shall be the grasses of the field. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat until you return to the ground. For from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return.
Elohim, Elohim, I beg you, Elohim. We're on our hands and knees. Elohim, see us. We're naked. We're bare. We're vulnerable. We're innocent like children. Elohim, I beg you, hear me. Hear me. We're sorry.
Thank you. Let's go forward now.
Can we please stay in the garden? Please, we'll practice listening. We're really going to work on it. And if you can help us, because you're the creator, you're omnipotent, you're more than we could ever be alone without you. Please help us do better. Would you?
Love to. He says, yes, thank you. Here we go. It's a new world.
And the only point there, and thank you all for watching our play, and thank you for playing. The only point there is that's one way the story got told. That's just one way the story got told. And it has shaped the mentality of humanity in very strong ways. And it's just one way the story got told of this knowledge and opposites and right and wrong and morality and your own inner knowledge and the external authority. The one way it got told is, what have you done? And they hid. But there's also, what have you done? And they bared themselves with apology and request for cleaning and starting afresh.
Teshuvah.
And the punitiveness is disturbing to me. So just wanted to bring that up.
I agree.
You know, we see a punitive God throughout the text, and we see an incredibly compassionate Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, no tzer chesed la'alafim, no se avon v'fesha v'chata'a v'nakeh. We see this Adonai that cleans us and renews. We have both, if we want to just divide two categories for now. And we can choose. And I, for one, stand for the choosing of the reconciliations, the sorry, please forgive me. Please help me learn. So the punitive of the story of Breshit feels very harsh, as you all said. Everyone has a different belief about where these words came from, and allowing us to not get into everyone's opinion or debate right now, though it could be an interesting one. The reason I acted this out with Rahmane, and the reason, and this has been inside of me for over a decade now, this character that I just got to act out, is because it is my belief that things got written down by certain people at certain times and for certain reasons. So we can take the ones that make us go more deeply into our health and our wisdom and our action as human being, and we could put aside the ones that feel punitive and make us feel restricted or bad about ourselves. Not to not take a lesson, but we're talking about punitive. We're not just, we're isolating punitive that makes us feel just bad. But taking a lesson, of course, there might be lessons. But I do want to allow us in our Kabbalah and our reading of sacred text to recognize that we just don't know exactly how these words got written down. And so we have to move it through ourselves to feel, does this serve my health and my well-being and that of my children and my colleagues?
Amen.
I'd like to hear a word or two or a sentence or two from anyone else before we complete for tonight.
We could view this whole story of Genesis from a different point of view, and that is fables that explain how things came to be. And to me, one of the clearest points of that is a little bit farther on in the story of Genesis, where we have that story of the Tower of Babel. Once in Genesis says that we're all descended from the same set of parents, Adam and Eve. Now we all know, everybody knows that we learn language from our parents. So then the question becomes, well, if we all descended from the same set of parents, how come there are so many different languages? So the Tower of Babel is a necessary explanation to answer that question. And likewise, the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve may be a necessary explanation for how we humans came to be in the first place.
It is. Thank you, Bert. And I'd also like to add that I really appreciate this discussion, and particularly the acting out of the reading this as a play, almost, because I had always seen it written as punitive, but when read aloud, these same words can be read as a very calming presence. Even where are you? That doesn't need to be punitive. Or who told you that you were arum? That doesn't need to be punitive, but we've kind of projected it onto this. So I'm really interested to explore these words a bit further now.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because in Rahman's very impromptu character, right, we heard the tone that came out, and those tones and even emphasis on different words could vary quite a lot.
What came up for me recently, and then I was losing it and then it came back, was the idea of it being a teaching story. So like elders are trying to train the young ones to listen to the advice of their elders and things like that, and to not disobey things that they are told. So that was part of what came up for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all. I welcome everyone to take these sheets that I made and go through, look at different translations for the verses, go through again to see the highlights, and the highlights are supposed to be color-coded. It's laborious for me because I mess up and then have to go back, but they're supposed to be color-coded to have a certain root system that relate them all, or the highlights I put in gray were also just to highlight this is interesting. No special point yet. And I welcome hearing any more Kabbalah you receive this week, if it's a word or a phrase or a proverb that you want to send to me written down. And if you want it to potentially be shared at the beginning of next class, that's fine. If you don't, that's also fine. But I welcome, this from last week, this stuff stayed alive in me again for days. I was having a lot more insight about Ayin Dalet and Dalet Ayin, and hearing again things you had all said too, because every time this is taught, we are receivers. We are receiving something together as this Edat Yisrael, the community of witnessers, presences of Israel together. And I will send you some information for next time very soon. Our third and final in this series, be looking at the root word for what's translated as sacrifice, and the various names of those. Every one of those words has very interesting Hebrew roots that point us so much in different directions than the translation itself. God bless, take care, stay safe.
Tomas wants to add, the reception of life is ever fresh and renews us with enthusiasm to express the blessedness of every breath received.
Thank you, Tomas. Thank you, Rahmane. Thank you, Abba. Thank you, Lasita. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Good evening.
Let's go.